Let's get after it. Today, we're witnessing a seismic shift in the world of technology and global power, one that will echo for years to come. Picture this. Your company's largest customer, the one you've relied on for years, suddenly says, "We're done." Not because your product failed, but because they've decided they don't want to depend on you anymore. The shock, the disbelief, the scramble to understand what went wrong, it's a nightmare scenario for any business. That's exactly what just happened on a global scale. Beijing has issued a sweeping order. Chinese companies must stop buying American computer chips. This isn't just a business decision, it's a geopolitical earthquake. There was no room for negotiation, no warning shot across the bow. This was a bold, unmistakable declaration of technological independence, a line drawn in silicon. The shockwaves hit instantly. In Washington, policymakers scrambled, realizing the rules of the game had changed overnight. The old playbook was suddenly obsolete. For decades, the US believed that controlling the world's most advanced technology meant controlling the future itself. Semiconductors were the crown jewels of American innovation. But with one move, China flipped the script, turning dependence into defiance and rewriting the rules of engagement. For American tech giants, Nvidia, Intel, Qualcomm, this was more than a setback, it was a gut punch that threatened their bottom lines and their global influence. China isn't just another customer, it's their biggest market, the engine of their growth, and the gateway to billions of consumers. Decades of building relationships, intricate supply chains, and mutual dependencies, gone in a single, stunning moment. The foundation of global tech commerce was shaken to its core. Billions of dollars were wiped off their stock values overnight. Investors panicked, and the markets reeled from the sudden blow. The message from Beijing was crystal clear. Your reliance on us is now your greatest vulnerability. The balance of power had shifted. How did the US, the undisputed leader in semiconductors and innovation, find itself in this precarious position? Years of escalating tensions, trade wars, and policies designed to contain China's rise may have had the opposite effect. Instead of keeping China dependent, they fueled its determination to break free. Those very policies pushed Beijing to invest, innovate, and ultimately declare its independence from American technology. The student had become the rival. This is about far more than microchips. It's about power, national pride, and a dramatic shift in the global order. The world's technological balance is being rewritten before our eyes. The US is no longer the only one making the rules. A new era of competition and uncertainty has begun. The world just changed in a way few could have predicted. To understand what comes next, we need to dig deeper. Let's dive in. What was the American plan? In a word, interdependence. The idea was simple, yet powerful. The US would design and manufacture the world's most advanced chips, pushing the boundaries of technology. China, with its massive market and manufacturing power, would buy them in huge quantities. American companies like Intel and Nvidia made billions from these sales, pouring profits back into research and development, fueling a cycle of relentless innovation. This cycle kept the US at the cutting edge and gave it a powerful form of leverage. If China ever stepped out of line, Washington could simply cut off the flow of critical technology. For US tech giants, China was the golden goose. Executives and lobbyists worked overtime to keep trade open, insisting that Chinese sales were the engine behind American innovation and prosperity. But here's what many missed. China didn't see this as a partnership. They saw it as a dangerous dependency, a vulnerability that could be exploited at any moment. While US firms focused on quarterly profits and short-term gains, Beijing was quietly playing the long game, planning decades ahead. True power, China realized, comes from not needing a supplier at all, from being able to stand on your own no matter what. The American plan was built on the assumption that China would accept this dependency forever. But that assumption just exploded, shattering the old order. China was never content to be just a customer, passively buying what others made. Behind the scenes, they were preparing to walk away all along, investing billions to build their own semiconductor industry from the ground up. The US thought it held all the cards, but China was quietly constructing its own escape route, determined to break free from American control. Now the tables have turned, the balance of power is shifting and the world is watching. The era of easy profits and unchallenged American leverage is over. The game has changed, and the stakes are higher than ever. The world's tech balance just shifted, and no one can afford to ignore what comes next. Why did China walk away? It's about sovereignty, not just business. Imagine building your future on a foundation your rival controls. That's how China saw its reliance on US semiconductors. The US had already used this power, sanctioning Huawei and crippling its business overnight. The lesson for China, depending on a rival for critical tech, is a national security risk. Performance mattered less than control. China's ambition is to be a technological superpower, not just a world power. Their Made in China 2025 plan aims for leadership in AI, robotics, and more. But none of it works if the US can pull the plug. Rejecting US chips was the only way to control their destiny. For China, this was a strategic pivot from world's factory to world's innovator. They're willing to accept short-term pain for long-term independence. The decision wasn't rash, it was years in the making. For Beijing, it's the only choice. This didn't happen overnight. For years, Washington tightened restrictions to slow China's tech progress, especially in military-related areas. The entity list made it nearly impossible for blacklisted Chinese firms to buy US tech. Huawei was the prime example. Once a global smartphone leader, it was cut off and crippled. The message to China's tech industry: what happened to Huawei could happen to anyone. The US then blocked advanced chip-making equipment, aiming to halt China's semiconductor ambitions at the source. Each new sanction convinced Beijing that self-reliance was a matter of survival. Instead of compliance, these moves fueled China's determination to break free. The US tried to build a fence to keep China in. In reality, it gave China the motivation to build a ladder out. Every restriction was seen as economic aggression. The US thought it was managing a problem. Instead, it created a determined competitor. The seeds of today's tech standoff were planted by yesterday's policies. Now we're seeing the harvest. When the world's dominant power tries to cut you off, you dig in. For China, the escalating trade war and mounting restrictions from the United States were a wake-up call. A signal that relying on foreign technology was a vulnerability that could no longer be ignored. In response, China launched a sweeping national mission to build its own semiconductor industry from the ground up, pouring in hundreds of billions of dollars and offering incentives to lure top talent back home from overseas. Universities, startups, and state giants all joined the effort, united by a sense of urgency and national pride. The goal was ambitious: to create a complete self-sufficient domestic supply chain covering everything from chip design and software to advanced manufacturing and testing. Progress was slow, often frustrating, and incredibly costly, but China's determination was relentless, with each setback fueling even greater resolve. Today, companies like SMIC are producing chips just a few generations behind the world's best, closing the gap year by year. China already dominates in legacy chips, those essential for cars, appliances, and industrial machines that power the global economy. The recent ban on US chips wasn't a rash move, it was a calculated decision, made after years of preparation and investment. China believes its industry is now strong enough to meet most of its own needs, reducing dependence on foreign suppliers. While their chips aren't as advanced as the latest American or Taiwanese models, at least not yet, they're reliable and good enough for the vast majority of applications. By guaranteeing a massive home market for its own chip makers, China is accelerating the growth and innovation of its semiconductor industry, creating a powerful feedback loop. The ban is both defensive and offensive. It shields China from external threats while pushing its tech sector to innovate faster and aim higher. The world's biggest and fastest growing market is now closed to US chip makers, forcing them to rethink their global strategies. China is betting it can close the technology gap, and maybe even take the lead. The race for semiconductor supremacy is on, and the outcome will shape the future of global technology. Who gets hurt when your biggest customer walks away? American tech giants. For Nvidia, Qualcomm, and Intel, China isn't just a market, it's the market. Losing China threatens their entire growth trajectory. Chinese phone makers, once reliant on Qualcomm, are now seeking domestic alternatives. Intel's processors powered China's computers for decades. Now that era is ending. Even Apple isn't immune, facing nationalism and shifting consumer sentiment in China. The profits from China once fueled US innovation. Now that engine is sputtering. The very policies meant to protect America's tech edge may end up starving it. Did we just hand China the perfect excuse to do what it always wanted? This is bigger than a few tech companies' stock prices. The US semiconductor industry supports hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs. When the biggest market disappears, layoffs and budget cuts follow. Less revenue means less investment in the next big breakthrough. Meanwhile, China is pouring money into its own chip industry. The US risks a downward spiral, China an upward one. Global supply chains are fracturing, decoupling is real. Two separate tech ecosystems are emerging, one US-led, one China-led. This means more uncertainty, higher costs, and slower progress for everyone. National security is at stake. The US military relies on a strong domestic chip industry. The tool meant to secure America's advantage could end up undermining it. We're living with the consequences. Where does this lead? We're entering a technology Cold War. The world is splitting into two tech spheres, US and allies versus China and partners. Countries will have to choose sides, not just in business but geopolitically. The internet itself could splinter, creating separate digital universes. Collaboration will suffer, innovation will slow, and technology will get more expensive. The era of a single global tech market may be over. The US once led because it was trusted and stable. Aggressive sanctions have damaged that trust. China's move is a reaction, and the world is watching. The next move will shape the future of technology for everyone.